Okay, so now I'm going to tell you about something that you kind of haven't seen before in prior courses, and that is something called iteration. And iteration is the way in imperative languages that repetitive behavior can be encoded. So if you want something done again and again and again and again, you use something called a loop. And in functional programming, you use recursion. You would call the same method again back on itself, or sort of some sort of mutual recursion where you kind of kept going down, down, down until you got to a base case. And loops also kind of have base cases, but they don't recurse. They just repeat. So there are many kinds of loops in Java and in all imperative languages. There's a while loop, a for loop, an until loop. And in this case, we're going to be using the syntactically simplest one, and that's called a for each loop. And that means that for each element of a particular list, we're going to run through the body of the loop. And once we have gone through each of the elements of the list, we will no longer be in the loop. The loop will exit and it'll keep going down the statements in the method. So a list looks like this. It has items in it. These can be interesting items like big objects, or they can be little strings or integers or whatever. They're usually all the same thing. And in this case, we have a list of strings. So a list of string. And how this loop works is that it looks in this thing called the list. We could have called that anything, by the way, but I just wanted to name it something that reminded us it was a list. It looks in this list called the list, and it gets the next value out of the list. So it takes the next one, and it assigns S to be that next value. So at first, the next value is the very first thing in the list. And then it runs these lines of code, comes back up to the top of the for loop, and then gets the next one. And then S is this value in the list, and then it's this value, and then it's this value, and in this way we iterate over. And just like with a conditional if statement, you have a block of code. So this is the block of code if there is, in fact, a next element. If there is no next element, then we skip this block of code and keep going. So the only time that there will be no next element is if we have already gone off the end of the list. Okay, so let's depict this one to visualize the execution flow through a loop. So here we have our start of our method, and then we have our for statement, and for the list. And we can sort of say for S in the list, or something that kind of tells us what this is more or less saying. So for each S in the list, and S is our little local variable of a string, then we execute everything that is inside of this block. So we say print S, and then we say print done item, and then we don't just keep going, because remember, we then still have more of the list to do potentially. So the next thing that we do is we actually loop back, hence the name. We loop back to here to check whether there are more strings in our little list. If there are more, then we keep going through here. And if there are no more, then this wraps down here to print done. And then the method ends. So we do not have a sequential link from print done item to print done. There is no arrow from here to here, because every time we're done the item, we wrap back up and loop to this for statement to see if there's another item in the list. And if there is not, only then do we jump down and get to the next part of the method.